Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for people who are curious about how to have a more fulfilling work life. We live in a world largely driven by numbers, logic and reason. But how we feel at work and about our work impacts us, our organisations and society. There is a relationship between the numbers of our organisations and the life beyond the numbers. I'm Susan Michrillon, your host. I've lived and worked in many countries. I've met people who love what they do and people who don't, people who bring their full selves to work and people who won't. But one thing that I've learned that is common to us all is that we are all unique and have unique experiences. And it's helpful to know that there are others who think like we do, or have had struggles too, or have gone where we want to go, or can show us things we didn't know. So join me and my guests as we place a lens on the human side of work life by sharing insights, stories and strategies to inspire you to let your uniqueness shine through. And welcome to episode 180 of Life Beyond the Numbers. And this episode is going out on Saturday, June 29th, 2024. And it's a compilation episode. And I thought, okay, what am I going to put together and how am I going to thread it together? If you were listening last week or to last week's episode, you might remember that I mentioned that the podcast reached a milestone of 10,000 downloads during the month of June. And that's quite phenomenal. It's small beans in a way. When you think about, you might not know this, but Taylor Swift played in Wembley last weekend to a crowd of 88,000 people, which is kind of hard to even imagine. And so these aren't big numbers in any sense. But having said that, episodes have been downloaded in more than 80 countries, and that's quite a reach. So it's not just in the UK or in Ireland, but different countries around the world, and that is testament to some of the guests that have come on who are connected and have spoken about things from different perspectives, and also my own global network and from my work, but also people I've connected with since starting this podcast and working for myself. And when I began working for myself, I wanted to know how I could be of service to others. And I find myself revisiting this question quite frequently. For example, I started the podcast to help people who were curious about how to have a more fulfilling work life. My book, Leading Beyond the Numbers, is about exploring the conditions, contributing factors, environment for this to be a reality for people, this fulfilling work life, and also why it matters. And then in the work that I do with people one-on-one, in teams, in organisations, it's about navigating transitions, the journey from making a decision about a desired state to taking actions to inhabiting that desired state or a desired state. So a transformation effectively. And I think of it like evolve, express, expand. So we can evolve ourselves or our teams or our organizations, or we revolve. We go around in circles, trying to do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. We can express who we are, who are we becoming, and do that to be true to ourselves and align ourselves with
what it is we want to see in the world. Or we can resist all of that. But ultimately, we expand our possibilities and perspective. Or we retreat until we're ready to evolve again. And I thought, well, there's 179 episodes so far. What are the top 10? And do those top 10 downloaded episodes have a central theme to them? Do they somehow tie into the purpose of this podcast? And I was delighted to find that yes, of course they did. So many of the guests that I speak to talk about aspects of their work-life journeys in this way. They graciously share with us how they navigated pivotal turning points, how they discovered their true self, and ultimately how they expanded their horizons in their work life. So it might be no surprise either then that from this top 10 downloaded episodes, that stories from 5 of them appear in my book. So today I'm going to play a short excerpt from each of these episodes that for me highlights this pivotal point or point of inflection, highlights an expression of their true self, or the transformation they have having decided to embark in a certain direction. And to start us off, we will hear from Sue Rosen. And of course, Sue set the direction for all my podcast episodes in a way, because episode 1 was called Stepping into the Unknown. So Sue's journey sets the stage for exploring how pivotal career decisions can lead to personal growth and transformation.
And was there a defining moment, Sue, that you woke up one morning and said, I want to do something different? Was it a process? How did you get there?
It had actually been quite a long time coming. Over the years, I would be happy in a new role for a short time, the challenge of being somewhere new, excitement of learning. And then I would go, oh, this is not really working for me. I'm not getting the enjoyment or fulfillment out of it. I always felt I had something more to give, something more to contribute, but I couldn't really put my finger on what that was. So I would have conversations, casual conversations, around the place about what else to do. I thought about recruiting briefly. I thought about training briefly. But it's also really hard sometimes when you've been in a career already for quite a few years by this point, that you've invested so much of your time and your money and your energy in this qualification. Looking back, I think I was very narrow-minded. I didn't really have my eyes really open to opportunities outside the finance team. And I see other people now, and I think what could have been really good for me was to actually take a sideways move within an organization into a different area of the business. I see people do that more and more often these days, and I think that is a really great way to broaden your skills. And I didn't have any kind of career strategy. And again, as probably you do with your clients now, I often talk to them about, well, where do you want to be?
Yeah.
I never wanted to be so narrowly one direction. So I avoided that kind of question. I think also I knew I didn't want to stay in finance. I knew that, but I just didn't know what the other options were. So eventually I sought out a career coach. I went, I have to change something. I was getting increasingly unhappy. And the defining moment in terms of actually making a change was that I had young daughters, and I would, like parents do, tell them, oh, you can be anything, you can do anything, all of those things. I realized What a load of bullshit I was talking. Because why should they trust what I said? I was miserable. And so that was really what got me. It was interesting how at 35, you could think that it was too late to change career because you'd invested 15 years of yourself and your career into one thing. And then in my 40s, I could go, oh, actually, I have a lot of career still ahead of me. Do I want to spend it like this?
Mm-hmm.
If I saw myself in this role, or even in my boss's role, if a bigger CFO role, how would I feel? And I went, oh, I would rather stick pins in my eyes. So, and sometimes it takes us a long time. Sometimes I think I'm a slow learner, and it took me a long time to realize that you can't keep doing the same thing and expect to get a different result. So you have to call it. Sometimes other people need to call you out on it. Or sometimes you need to say, I need to invest time, energy, money in something new. It's not just going to happen magically without me doing something. So that's how I came to be in coaching, and then looking at things and going, actually, I love having these deeper conversations. Yeah. And also I can see how it's challenging me to actually do something differently. So I started putting my toe in the water in terms of courses and education, and accepting that it wasn't going to be an overnight fix. That's the other thing. Accepting that this was the start of a new journey. I wasn't just going to walk out of a CFO role into something completely different. It was going to take time, and I was going to have to create something different that is what I wanted.
So Sue's journey shows really courage to shift career and find fulfillment. Next, we're going to hear from John Purkiss, who overcomes some quite personal challenges through meditation and letting go, enabling him to find deeper fulfillment.
I had a very mainstream academic background. In the UK, a lot of people used to go to grammar schools as opposed to private schools. I went to one of those, which was very academic, and got into Cambridge. One thing I noticed was that our school was great, although it was free. At the peak, about 15% of the people went to Oxford and Cambridge, which was high for a state school. But I also noticed that among those people, there were a number of suicides. And I kind of parked that in my mind. So I went to Cambridge, I worked in banking and consulting, and I went to INSEAD, and everything worked brilliantly, and they gave me first prize at INSEAD. And then I got completely stuck. And 3 months after leaving INSEAD, I was diagnosed with depression. So one of the primary symptoms being that you have suicidal thoughts.
Wow.
So
how old were you now, John?
I was 26. I had this idea that I might not live beyond 27, you know, the famous people who die at 27 thing. And in my case, it nearly happened. So I realized, okay, so I've done all this left brain clever stuff like accounting, finance, languages, strategy, marketing, and I feel suicidal. So clearly I am missing something. My father was in sales, my brother's in sales. And I realized there were people who were far less academic than me who were leading much happier lives and were not trying to kill themselves. So I then got involved in sales, and then that didn't really work out all that well. And then one day I was in Paris running a business which basically wasn't working at all. In fact, Paris had completely closed down, as it does occasionally, with strikes. And I was reading this book called A Rich Man's Secret, which sounded kind of promising. And I started copying what the protagonist in the book did. And basically, it was all about returning to the present. He kept saying now knows, return to now. So I kept returning to the present. And what I noticed was my intuition suddenly became much stronger. I was brought up as a Christian. So I essentially got asked to be guided, and I just let go completely. And then 6 months later, I had this great job working for the chairman of Heidrick & Struggles, one of the big 5 search firms. I was working for the chairman of Heidrick & Struggles in London. So I've been trying to earn a certain amount of money for years. And it happened automatically as soon as I let go. It's quite spooky. The base salary was within 2% of my goal, which I'd been failing to meet for years.
Wow.
Right? Anyway, so that introduced me to the idea that intellect and training and all these things, it's all really good. However, it's only half the story at most. I mean, you could say It's a tiny part. It's like a tool. Like the analysis is a tool, right? And there's something much bigger going on, which we can tune into. So I've been a headhunter since 97. I'm a partner with a firm called August Leadership now, which is a new global search firm. And when I meet people, you know, I used to have cups of coffee. Now I have virtual cups of coffee with chief executives and everything. And, you know, and then they say, well, I'm looking for this job. Okay, fine. Okay. And I say, well, show me your CV. And we talk about how they could improve their brand and their LinkedIn page. And my third question is, do you meditate? Which is shorthand for, have you begun the journey? and the journey, because most of us have been conditioned to think in, I would call it a very two-dimensional way. So accounting and finance usually involves looking at a piece of paper or looking at a screen in 2 dimensions, right?
Yeah, and it's black or white.
It's black or white, it's 2 dimensions, and we've been conditioned to think that way. Well, Cosmos doesn't work like that. Cosmos works in many, many dimensions, and it's not linear. And I'm sure people listening to this have experienced it. Certain very important things happen in our lives, which are not linear, they're not analytical, and they change everything. And so, for example, my letting go and getting this great job at Heidrick & Struggles was an example of that. I mean, when I was 35, I was suddenly recruiting finance directors in the FTSE 100. So it's pretty dramatic change. And actually, it was less effort than before. We've also been conditioned to think that all this stuff about no pain, no gain, all that stuff, it's not true. These days, I'm very, very active, but it's not a struggle. My mind and body are very active.
So John introduced us to an exploration of the role of intuition and consciousness in personal growth and evolving, and also connected that into the role of mental and emotional well-being in your own personal mental and emotional well-being, and how important that is for growth. Next, we're going to hear from Anna Haslock. And Anna demonstrates finding purpose in the face of adversity, and how personal challenges and building your resilience can fuel a purpose-driven life. Anna, tell us about Lost Dot.
Okay, so Lost Dot is a company, a not-for-profit company set up in 2017, and it's set up to run 2 ultra-distance cycling events, both in Europe. And we were set up in 2017 because the founder of our events, Mike Hall, was tragically killed in a road collision in Australia when he was racing. And so Mike was my partner, and I had been assisting him to run these events. Well, just the event, which is called the Transcontinental Race. My title was race coordinator, and he was the race director. And we ran the event together for about 3 years. And then he was killed, obviously suddenly and completely unexpectedly, in Australia, which was, of course, all kinds of awful. He was killed in the middle of organising the 2017 event, because it takes place in July every year, just after the Tour de France is finished. So Mike died, and of course, lots of problems and issues and things, but one of them was, do we put the event on this year? And if so, how? Because how do we do it without Mike? Mike was very famous within our sport, very famous ultra cyclist. He held the fastest man around the world on a bike, unsupported record. And he won many of the large famous events within our field. So one is the Trans Am in America. The other is the Tour Divide, also in America, which he still holds the record for all these years later. So he's a very impressive cyclist and a very impressive human. So we had to decide if we were going to put the race on. And of course, that was a discussion with me, with his family, with our sponsors, and with some other people who've been involved in the race and have helped us over the years. So we brought this loose team of people together to decide. And the decision was, yes, we were going to do it. in Mike's honour as his legacy. We thought if it didn't happen that year, it might never happen again. It felt like a good thing to focus our energy on, and it felt quite healing to all come together and as a group and support each other in our grief and work towards something really positive. It was a bit scrappy because most people had a full-time job and people just pitched in, and because I'd worked with Mike, it was decided that I would be the race director. And then 4 of us formed a company, Lost Dot, and we were going to take the race forward. And so, yeah, we put the race on that year, and then Lost Dot decided we would continue to put the race on. So we formed this social not-for-profit company, and we gave ourselves some missions. So one was to preserve Mike's legacy and run the race as he'd intended it to be raced. So by races for races, and to keep it grassroots and to keep it not focused on profit and to keep it very focused on what his ideals were for the race. One of our missions is to celebrate integrity in sport over winning at any cost, which is very close to my heart and was very close to Mike's heart, and to promote adventure cycling for physical and mental health. Obviously, cycling is a sustainable form of transport. If you're going to travel thousands of kilometers on your bike, it's a way of proving to people that a bike is more than just something to poodle to the shops. If you want to, you can go around the world on your bike. So there's that. And obviously part of the race is this challenge, it's this personal challenge. So it's to promote taking on a big challenge as a means of personal growth and to challenge your self-development and prove to yourself what you're capable of, really. And the final one was to promote road justice. Obviously, I mean, that's close to any cyclist's heart.
Demonstrates clearly a turning point and how a personal hardship can lead to discovering a mission and serving a larger community, as well as driving meaningful change and contribution. Next, we're going to hear from Robin Kiziak. And Robin's episode focuses on inspiring us to express our true selves in our professional settings.
When I was at DHL, they had like a management training course that I went on. And in that, you went through various modules, looking at the bigger company picture and what various departments did, those sorts of things. And it came to the end, and we had a presentation to do to some quite senior execs, and that they all came in, and you had to sit down. So very nerve-wracking. And what we'd been asked at the very start of the course was, if you had to be something in the kitchen, what would you be and why? One of those sort of icebreaker type questions. So me being me, I sat there and I thought about it. And I said, okay, this is it. I'm going to go for it. So I said, if I had to be anything, I'd be a fridge, because in a finance, we sit in the corner and we hum. And then I sort of followed it up and I said, but I'm cool with that. And so I got a bit of a laugh, so I thought I'm going to put this into my presentation at the end. And I was saying about, so I started off this whole program with this little joke, and that's what the whole program sort of turned into me. How do we sort out this issue of the fridge? So seeing the fridge as if your fridge breaks down, you replace it, you repair it. And I think as the whole program, it's sort of all pulled together. So basically, I did this whole presentation around, started with a fridge, I went through it all, and then came back to I fixed the fridge. So that was it. So I thought I was quite clever doing that. It's a bit of my schoolboy humour as well. And then I had one of the execs came up to me afterwards and had a private word. And he said, your presentation was really good, but there's nothing funny about finance. I was like, oh, okay. And so I thought, no, this is my chance now. I'm going to use that because, that just hits the nail on the head. I've gone through all of this and made people laugh. I'm saw him laughing, but then he came up to me afterwards and made the point saying, there's nothing funny about finance. Okay, I'm going to make it out of that.
No, it's brilliant. But was he coming from the perspective of don't make light of it? What was his message to you? Or actually, I just
stay out of humour, it's not for you.
Yeah, perhaps he was saying that. No, I think it was perhaps he was concerned that I'd put too much humour into the presentation rather than being deadly serious about the subject. I had to argue that I'll probably there was the right balance there, and people enjoyed it. So everyone else came up to me afterwards and said, "Yeah, that was really good. You got your point across, and also it was funny." But yeah, there was one person who just said, "Yeah, there's nothing funny about violence." So,
there's always one.
Yeah. I take your point, but yeah, carry on.
Yeah. Did people remember the points that you were trying to make, Robin? Because storytelling is a skill, isn't it?
It certainly is, yeah. And I think he did. I think that's that thing. It's a lot of it is around, you don't appreciate what people are telling you until you experience it yourself in a lot of cases. Now, going back to childhood again, you think about when you were a child, what are the things you remember from your childhood? Probably when people were telling you stories. It's not the people what you should believe, it's when you're using your imagination and actually understand it for yourself. So I think sometimes that's the power of storytelling is sort of through that. So people probably came away from that presentation and said, "Oh yeah, we was talking about fridges." There was something about fridges in there, but then also there was also some other salient points that I would have picked up and remembered about it as well. So I think it's that that storytelling is so powerful. That
does help us see how being ourselves, telling stories and bringing our humour, but our unique perspective, can really help in a professional environment. Of course, it's not going to work for everyone. That also isn't enough of a reason not to be ourselves, because I think it will help more often than not. And in the next snippet we hear from Eamon FitzGerald, who really again illustrates the impact of being yourself and how that can help you have business success or success at work.
After a year, Rowan went off to the US to set up Naked Wines USA over there. And for some reason, he picked me to run the company, aged 26 to 27, with no experience of running a team, let alone a company. But he must have seen something in me, because I definitely didn't see it myself. And we can talk about Rowan, but one of the great things he always taught me is that you value attitude over experience. And he could have hired someone a lot older and a lot more experienced than me, but he didn't. I think it worked out well. But it wasn't going so well at the start. So I hadn't a clue what to do, which is probably quite normal. It's 35 people, there's 25,000 customers, about 30 million in sales, and suddenly you're supposed to run the thing. And it took probably one of the most humiliating experiences of my life to really, change a gear or something happened. So I was invited to speak at this marketing festival down in London, and I'm quite introverted, so public speaking just terrified me. And so I had to get up in front of 500 people to just talk about Naked Wines. And I'd done a couple before, they'd gone well, obviously terrified before them, but I did okay. And I think the biggest mistake I was making in the early days of being a managing director was, and I see it, so many people do it going into new roles, is you try to be someone else, or you try to be the person who's just maybe vacated that role. So Rowan is this charismatic, entrepreneurial, softly spoken South African, set up 3 businesses for Richard Branson at Virgin, created Naked, awesome idea, and such a presence, big shoes to fill. So not having a clue what else to do, it's like, well, I'm just going to try and be Rowan. And so I got up at this marketing talk in front of 500 people, and I was talking about Naked and the model, and it was all going fine. And then I looked down at the audience, first mistake, and someone in the front row just looked bored, and it threw me. And I lost my train of thought. The voice started to go dry, and then the voice went, and I just froze on stage in front of 500 people. And obviously just wanted the stage to swallow me up there and then. And yeah, I've kind of recovered it and battled through the last 5 or 6 minutes, and all fine in the end. But sat down afterwards, and I'd had a mare. I was just sitting there going, that was awful. And I was speaking with a guy called Matthew Phelan, and he kind of just bigging me up and trying to pull me back. And he was like, people were loving what you were talking about, especially the winemaker. And I was like, oh yeah, thanks, whatever. I appreciate it. But as I reflected on that experience, I thought, that there was something in that. And I was at my most comfortable talking about the winemakers and their stories rather than the business model and the funding and all that stuff. So I thought, right, next time I'm up on stage, I'm going to talk about the winemakers because people love that bit, and that's what I should focus on. So I realized I needed to be not Rowan and be more authentically me and really play up what I'm passionate about. And those speeches are a walk in the park when I do that. And it just so happens, as it turns out, being authentically me means more sales when it comes to marketing and everything. So that was a big lesson I learned early on. It took a very tough learning experience, but that sense of being yourself, for all its flaws and all its good things as well, was a huge learning for me early on.
Wow, thank you for sharing that story. That story, I find it to be so powerful, delivered with such humility as well, and truly emphasizes being yourself. So I wonder, if you're listening now, what ways can you, being yourself at work, change the dynamics of some of your relationships that perhaps you feel could be better? Next, we're going to hear from John Collins, who, having transformed or gone through the process of a turning point and a transition, worked for Pukka Herbs, and it was an organisation for him that was integrating his personal values and personal and professional values. So Pukka, a beacon for sustainable and ethical business.
Yeah.
And can we really have it all? Can we do the people, purpose, planet and profit? And can they sit together, John?
Yes, Susan, is the answer, in my own opinion, by the way. No, that's not a definitive yes.
That's
but
okay.
It's very easy to underestimate what that actually takes. Every business today will talk about their purpose, right? And they'll talk about their sustainability agenda and all the good things they are doing. And that generally is great, right? Because wind the clock back even 5 years, and that wasn't the case. And even Diageo, when I look at some of the things they're doing in their supply chain, this is like game-changing stuff in terms of water uses and stuff. And that wasn't really on the agenda 5 to 10 years ago. But what it all boils down to is when decisions are being made about the deployment of resource, and whatever that resource is, what are the determining factors in making those decisions? And I think organizations have a long way to go before they can genuinely say, we consider all of the impact that we have and not just the financial bottom line. And to get to that point where businesses and organizations are truly making decisions with that lens, we've a long way to go. But when you get to that point, that's when you hit the jackpot. It's really hard, particularly when you have stakeholders, shareholders, etc. But this is why I also feel, Susan, that business is the key to this, right? Because business and commerce and consumption is really one of the things that's at the heart of the situation that we're in. And that's not going to stop, right? As much as some people would like it to, it's not, right? So you can either bemoan that on the outside, or you can be part of the solution on the inside. And so that's a long way of answering your question. But Susan, yes, I do believe we can do it, but man, it's hard work.
Oh, well, it's not a long way either, because I think there were so many points in there that are important, John. And it is very easy to think, yes, we can just flip a switch and prioritize people even, and then the planet, and not just profit. But it is that lens you're talking about, and that involves bringing everyone in the business and the stakeholders together.
Yeah, no, totally. But and I also think, Susan, on that, it is easier now because you ask potential candidates who are joining your organization, what are their intrinsic motivations? And 80-90% of the time, they will say, I want to be part of an organization that is making a positive difference in the world. And that's a genuine thing. That's not a soundbite that they say, I think they want me to say this because I'm in the interview. I do think that the new generation, I don't even like saying new generation because it says I'm not part of that. And that is the truth that I have to accept. But the new generation coming through, for very real reasons, this is front and center of their concern. And so businesses, it's a necessity actually now, because I think organizations that just continue to grow for the sake of growth, or whose sole purpose is to just generate profit, I think the runway for those organizations is getting shorter and shorter.
What are your thoughts on what John has to say? And do your values and motivations align with the work that you do? Next, we're going to hear from Kevin Ashley, who speaks to providing purpose as an employer and a way of tapping into these intrinsic motivations for people.
One of the great successes of Java is people are coming into Java with very little skills. So first thing you want to do is you want to get good people on the HR side. So this is really an HR story. I used to personally go through every CV. Remember, we got to a size where we were 65 restaurants with 2,000 employees.
Whoa.
Right? So even when we were almost near that size, I was going through the CVs and I had a threshold, right, of what their grades had to be. They had to be smart, right? And they had to be hospitable. And then when they came to the interview, they had to have a good reason why they needed that job. It wasn't because their parents wanted them out of the house. It had to be because they had a brother who couldn't go to school unless they made money to help that brother. And so once they came in, most of them started as dishwashers. But in that 3 months as a dishwasher, they got to observe the operations of the rest of the restaurant. And so whenever I would go and visit one of our restaurants, I would always go straight to the dishwashing area. And people would always go, why are you talking to the dishwashers and you're not talking to the managers? Because I wanted to instill in them a dream. So I'd go into the dishwasher and say, hey, how long have you been at Java? They'd say, oh, I've been here a month. Great. So what are you training to be next? They're like, oh, I'm training to be a barista. Great. I'm training to be a chef or cook. I'm training to be a wait staff. And so we built that from the second they arrived. They already had a plan. They could see a trajectory where their salary as a wait staff just starts going up exponentially as they jump up the ladder. So when you build that enthusiasm for people to build their careers, number one, they don't leave your company, they stay with you. And it allows you to build more branches because you have an army of people ready to take the next job that opens up. And so that allowed our whole scale of Java succeeded by really paying and taking care of our staff, number one, making sure every year their lives got better, right? Either through promotions or just raises. We gave every position a raise every year, no matter what. And then giving things like medical cover, pension, all these things that give people peace of mind so they could focus on their work. And that allowed us to grow, right? I mean, that was the secret. And so quality becomes easier to maintain when people are happy, right?
Totally. The financial security or the security isn't the only thing that keeps people happy, though. I mean, I think there's probably more to it, like what you said about speaking to the guy who's washing the dishes. The minute you come in the store, you treat people with respect.
Yeah, absolutely. It's respect, but it's also how does an individual embrace their day, right? So a lot of people think it's about showing up. Right. And so we used to try to help our staff. We used to try to help them understand that when you're at work, you're actually there to serve a bigger thing than yourself. And your job is part of this package. But if you're going to be here for 8 hours, might as well do your best. Might as well figure out what winning looks like in this position in this restaurant. So what does winning look like for a barista? Right? quality, speed, right? Cleanliness, engagement with the customer. So always trying to tell them, you got to keep thinking. So continuous improvement is not a corporate thing that you talk about in the boardroom. It's every single person has to embrace, how do I get better at what I do each day, right? Because if you're just showing up, there's no purpose. Because the whole thing is dignity of work and sense of purpose is what is the key for the future of humanity if we're all going to actually have a functioning society, right? And so that's what we were trying to get each person to understand.
As I said to Kevin, I couldn't have said it better myself. It was music to my ears, that piece. Also, just thinking now is that question, how do I get better at what I do each day? Next we hear from Dougal Freeman, who discusses facing some challenges working in conflict zones and how these experiences shaped his life and career.
I did a spell with the American Refugee Committee in Kosovo and another spell in Rwanda, and this was more about helping sort out finances, financial control systems, setting up teams. But the extra piece to that was dealing with a completely different range of ethnicity and people issues. In particular in Kosovo, it was at the time just after the war there in the Balkans, and the security team from the American Refugee Committee insisted we have RPG screens on the windows because we had Serbians, Albanians, Kosovars all working, and the tension sometimes in the office was palpable. And getting things done, you had to start to think about how to keep people in on a common goal despite some of the rivalry or
Politics I suppose,
that people brought with them to the office.
Yeah. I'm curious, what was it like to be in Jordan at the beginning of the Second Gulf War?
So that's quite a bit like a slow motion train wreck, because you could sit in Jordan at night having a beer in the only pub you were allowed into as a non-Muslim, watching CNN and Al Jazeera and watch the build-up of the troops and soldiers. Yet you were sitting in what appeared to be on the face of it quite an English pub, having a beer, but people were leaving, flights were reducing. One of the biggest challenges I had was we put a new finance system in. We had to sort of recreate a full set of books on books and accounts for Care Australia. We managed to do it on time, but it was a real challenge because I had a team of ethnic, multi-religious, multi-gendered, and there was a whole lot of political, religious, gender-based issues and challenges between the team, and clearly people didn't like each other because of religion. They didn't like the women members of the team, or they didn't like the Kenyan members, or the Bangladeshi members didn't like the Jordanians. And it was a real challenge, and I had to continually and persistently remind people that we were all working for Care, that we had a common goal. Some of them were working for Care because it was just a job. Some of them chose to work for Care because they liked the organisation. But persistently and continually reminding people that we needed to achieve this. It was important to sit and listen to people sometimes and let them vent their frustrations. And if they were being insulting or rude to other members of the team, you had to steer them back, but being cognizant of any religious issues or ethnicity issues or gender issues. And the team ranged from a fantastic old gentleman who had done his chartered accounting training under the old UK Arab board to a very, very super smart Yemeni lady who was training under ACCA, and then a whole host of individuals in between. But my big learning there was you really need to sit and understand the people in the team and what's behind things if you want to get stuff done. It's not about just putting extra fertilizer on a wheat crop. You have to really work with and immerse yourself in some of the challenges that may be petty on the face of it, but actually mean something to people.
We always need to understand the people we're working with, and often it goes beyond what we see on a day-to-day basis or at face value, and it's really important to tune in to individuals' motivations, understand their purpose, but also understand what can keep us from collaborating that may well extend beyond the confines of the job and the common goal. And next we're going to hear from Sheila Walsh, who talks about adaptability and leadership to keep that team cohesion together when things are difficult.
It surely was a most extraordinary year. This time last year, all was good. We were planning our strategy for the year ahead from a people perspective. And yeah, pretty much from mid-February, we started to hear rumblings around COVID. And then my CEO and CFO had a meeting with the chair and an external ex-pharma guy. And basically after that meeting, CEO got the leadership team together and was like, okay, this is going to be serious. We need to plan. We literally did like a war room the next day, full day, and kind of just went, what happens here? What we're going to do? What are the decisions we need to make if this really goes as we think it may do? Because as you mentioned, being in travel tech, we had a sense that obviously the impact would be swift and immediate, which is how it transpired to be. So we moved to very practical, tactical, operational decisions quite quickly, trying to just do very practical things around ordering laptops, enabling extra Zoom licenses, getting people set up at home, preparing for remote working, which was something we'd never done before. One of our USPs had always been, we're all based in Dublin pretty much. We've got two employees in the States. And then it was like, okay, distributed workforce pretty much overnight. So phenomenal bias to action to make that happen really quickly over that couple of weeks. And pretty much by 13th of March, everybody was working remotely. Yeah, so that was just incredible.
How many, Sheila? How many?
So that was like the guts of like 450 people.
Whoa.
Yeah, and also including like we've got a customer contact center and getting everybody set up remotely. Like it was just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal, and a massive shout out to our IT guys who made that happen. And there was kind of it sounds ridiculous to say now, a bit of like excitement. Oh, this is all happening now, and we're still like
novelty.
Yeah, the novelty of it. Certainly, I think a piece around we had sunshine. It was March, April, May. It was really people like, oh, right, this is happening. And everyone kind of, pivoted to that. Zoom, there were the halcyon days of Zoom. Oh, what happened Zoom? So we're all exhausted with Zoom now. We hadn't found the touch-up appearance button at that stage. We've all found it since. But I think then behind all of that, so there was very much like we were focused on making that happen. But then behind all of that, then obviously there was an impact on our business. And then our CEO and CFO basically stepped away and said, we're going to figure out what we're going to do here. And the rest of the LT kind of, manage the business, make sure that we keep things going. And to enable us to do that, we created like another focus, because in a business which is super focused on trading metrics, in a world where obviously airlines aren't flying, that has an immediate impact. So we actually wanted to create clarity and focus for people because we're extremely focused on strategic priorities. And so we just thought, okay, we're going to maximize for the bounce for when it comes and really focus on the internal things we've got influence over. So be it processes, things that are scalable, robust, all that type of good stuff, to ensure everybody was focused and purposed and repurposed if necessary for that particular period. That was a key piece as well about keeping people engaged throughout that time. We also made conscious decisions around rolling out like our mental health at Controller program. We had trained up about 25 people on being mental health first aiders. Our CSR team played a key role throughout this whole period as well. They had a whole strategy for things that were going to happen and plan for. Office-based, they pivoted immediately to how can we actually deliver the strategy while everybody's remote. Super sports and social team did the exact same thing. They were like, okay, everyone's remote now. What can we do? And like silly little things that might sound silly, but super important, like sending out biscuits, little treats, doing things remotely, sending out wildflower seed bombs from our CSR committee, doing a stay-at-home challenge. And we were really trying to focus on being inclusive for everybody. So families involved, because obviously people are perched on the end of beds or kitchen tables or the most random places It's now their office, it's now their home, it's now their gym, it's now where they cook, it's there they eat. Like, it's really challenging. So throughout that time, while this was going on, and we were kind of making sure everybody was repurposed and focused on what we could control throughout this period of quite uncontrollable context, CFO and CEO pretty much went through a sale process of the business. So the business actually was sold, and we got new owners throughout this process as well.
Oh,
which
really? Wow.
Fairly phenomenal when you think about everything was remote and nobody to this day even physically met our new owners. So
real roller coaster.
Absolute roller coaster. And then, then literally we came towards thinking that we could see pickups. You could see certain things because we can see, obviously, further out, we can see pent-up demand. And you're like going, okay, this is looking good. You're coming into like end of summer. But then you could just see straight away, as there were decisions made by governments, quite rightly, obviously, around restrictions and quarantines, immediately you would see demand move or shift. So we could see, once Spain put in their quarantine, we could see demand move to Portugal, but then unfortunately then that would change too. So these were having real impacts. As a result, as an LT, which is the leadership team, we had to make some kind of hard choices and decisions then towards the end of the year, and basically to right size our cost base for the next 12 to 18 months, looking through that lens of, we're confident, and we could tell obviously there was a vaccines coming down the tracks. However, there is a time lag between the rollout and us seeing the tangible positive impact from that. So we started a process to do that towards the end of the year. And basically by the end of the year, we did have a number of employees exit as part of that process. Really challenging, really tough. But I have to say, I'm so proud of everyone in the business, the people who are still with us and the people who left. They were fantastic, like absolutely fantastic. People were, treated with dignity, treated with respect. We did all we could to support our people. Delighted to say people left on good terms. We have some open roles, and a couple of people who have left have referred people back to us and things like that. So for me, that speaks volumes.
And Sheila demonstrates that adaptability that's needed, but the coming together as well, and keeping people front and centre and informed, and having to make those difficult decisions. There was turnaround, transition and transformation all within that segment, all the while keeping an eye on organisational health. And lastly, we're going to hear from Katharina Moser. And Katharina talks about the inner development goals. And I think it nicely ties this whole episode together in a way by looking at how we can evolve our self-awareness and our way in the world by understanding ourselves. It's like the first step to understanding others, and then how this informs collective development and can have an impact on the world.
So the whole idea around the IDGs emerged a few years ago with a few institutions in Sweden sitting together, looking at the current status of the world and kind of wondering why it is that we are not really progressing further and faster towards the SDGs, and why crises are, right, the contrary, getting bigger and bigger and more complex, and everything seems to be just more daunting. And the answer they kind of set to themselves is, it's not so much that we haven't got enough people who are interested to reach the SDGs, and it's not even a financial problem. It seems to be more of a problem that we as humans just find it really hard to actually work together. And right, the contrary, we seem to be quite taken aback when the world becomes fuller of crisis. We tend to go into nihilism. We try to ignore it because it just gets too difficult to deal with. So the question they posed themselves was, what are the skills and capacities that we as humans need to develop in order to be able to deal with our outer challenges better and actually reach the SDGs? And this is the question they then took and posed to the global scientific community, basically. And they got some 4,000 replies. And out of these, they created the framework that now is called the Inner Development Goals. And since we have 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the IDGs are also kind of arranged in that order. And there are 23 of them that are allocated into 5 dimensions. And I'm just kind of briefly explaining the dimensions to you just to give you a better understanding of what they are. So the first one is being. And in the dimension of being, you find skills like presence, where it's really all about being able to be with your own feelings and your thoughts. The second dimension is thinking. And I think that's a really important one, because a lot of times when people think about inner work, they might think, yeah, I'm sitting there meditating. But actually, cognitive skills are very much part of the concept of the IDGs as well. So there you find skills like complexity awareness, which is getting increasingly important in our world, or long-term perspective, sense making. The third dimension is relating. So there it's all about how can we actually connect to each other better. So there you find skills like compassion or humility. In the fourth dimension, it's all about collaborating. So there it's about communication skills, mobilization skills. And finally, the fifth dimension is acting. And there you find skills like courage, perseverance, and optimism. So the things that we really need in order to get started. And maybe one important aspect that I find is that when we talk about inner work, it sounds hard as well. And it sounds like something that I have to do individually, sitting by myself in my little corner. And I think the concept that we're trying to promote here as well is that inner development is something that we might do individually, but we do it as a collective. And we do it in order to change our culture so that we have inner development as a crucial part of our society and of who we are as human beings. And out of that, a completely different world can emerge.
This would really change workplaces, I think.
I think so too. And I also feel like after COVID, I think so many people have really gained a new sort of consciousness almost that things have to change, and that the way how we're living is maybe not the best and not the most humane way. And also, like, since in your podcast it's a lot about work, it's not the best way how we're working and how we're organizing our institutions and our organizations. So I think there is this innate feeling that something is not quite right and we should change something. But then it's probably a bit more difficult to really, first put words to it and then also change that if you feel like you're the one who has to do this by yourself. And I think this is also what the IDGs are out there to get across as a key message. You're not alone in this. You're not supposed to do this by yourself. We can do this together. And through that, we can create a different world.
We can create a different world. We can transform what's happening globally by doing our own inner work and developing ourselves. And I'd just like to say thank you to all of those guests and all the guests I've had on this podcast for their insights, their stories, and inspiring us. And when I set about to put this episode together, I started it from looking at what I do in the world and my purpose and what that might be. And this week I've been doing some work on that, and with help from somebody, I came up with inspire all of us to be understood for who we are, so we live truly. And that is my purpose. And I focus on work-life transformation because I fundamentally believe that as we spend so much time at work and we all want to contribute and be of value, we want to show up ourselves. And if that happens, I believe everyone benefits. Your colleagues, your customers, your suppliers, your family, your neighbours, your community, your village, town, city, and ultimately your society and globally. Your environment will benefit. The bottom line of the organisation can also benefit. As humans, we can transform our work life through evolving our self-awareness, expressing our genuine true self, and expanding the possibilities and perceptions towards greater joy and fulfillment. I wish you the very best with that. And I'm going to leave you with the question, how often do you bring your true self to work? Until next week, thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the paths we traversed on today's episode. If something rang through for you, be sure to let me know. Or maybe you can share this with someone in your life who would benefit from listening too. And if you enjoy helping others, I'd be so grateful if you would leave a review, so that people who might also be curious about their own life beyond the numbers can discover this podcast too.